continue our conversation on H126 with Secretary Moore from Agency of Natural Resources. Welcome.
Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to join you this afternoon. I did send a markup of H126 with some proposed changes from the Agency of Natural Resources, and if all goes well, I will share my screen and can walk you through them right now. In addition, I understand Trey Martin was here earlier this afternoon and walked you through a set of changes proposed by the, well, except I can't scroll. Oh, here we go. My apologies. Trey Martin was here earlier this afternoon and walked you through a set of proposed changes from the Vermont Housing Conservation Board. They had also shared those with the agency, and I've attempted to reflect both sets of changes in the document that I have shared. So changes from A&R are shown in red on the version I will walk you through, and the changes from DHCB are shown in blue. The first set of changes is at the end of the definition section. And this is, I would offer, similar to a recommendation or request we had brought to this committee last year, which is to modify somewhat the definition of what conserved means. First, to indicate that it is primarily permanent conservation, but also acknowledges that there are other conservation tools that we believe are necessary and appropriate in achieving the state's conservation goals. I think the expanded definition for conserved will allow us to prepare a conservation plan that meets both the intent of this committee as well as reflects the ongoing work of the agency. We are suggesting modifications to the definition of conservation goals, and this is to align it with how Vermont Conservation Design defines our conservation work, which is an ecologically functional landscape. And then there are 5 supporting elements that are evaluated in looking at what ecologically functional means, including biodiversity, connectivity, climate resilience, working lands, and then opportunities for recreation and outdoor use.
Representative Smith.
Thank you. I was talking a little while ago about in the event that the state acquires more land, that appears to address the hunting and fishing and camping issues. So there would be nothing taken away from these properties if they were purchased after this agreement was.
Correct. The Agency of Natural Resources has always strongly held that public access is an essential element of public lands. And so this is an acknowledgement of that and would continue to provide those opportunities going forward.
So that would keep everything the way it is today in essence. So
in terms of our existing land portfolio, yes. This is aligned with how we have gotten to the point of our existing land portfolio. There is no intention to take limit access.
Thank you. I have one more question, if I may. Do you see more money necessary in the event this bill passes?
Yes, I don't. Depending on how
more employees, I guess, or
that to prepare the plan or to implement the eventual plan.
Both.
So certainly capacity to prepare the plan is challenging. That's part of why we're so pleased with the partnership with VHCB, that they have resources they're able to bring to bear to hire a contractor that will provide capacity for developing the plan. Were the agency to do it with existing staff, it would be a challenge. We are really stretched at the moment. In particular, as a result of federal funds, the agency's budget is roughly double this year what it was when I started in this position 6 years ago. Almost all of that doubling is passed through grants and contracts as a result of different federal funding programs, but we have exhausted all of any internal capacity we may have had, as well as brought on a number of limited service positions but simply don't have more hours in the day. We would have to stop doing something in order to prepare this plan using our existing resources.
Do you see a need for an appropriation or a request for an appropriation?
I guess I'm not clear. I'm not clear on the committee's necessarily intentions around the VHCB-led effort. If the VHCB-led effort is seen as sufficient to meet the goals of this plan, no, we've made staff resources available to participate in the plan, but to the extent we need to do something similar but not identical to what VHCB is doing, we would need additional resources to support that work.
Thank you, Secretary.
So as I noted, a change in the conservation goals, both A and B, that is intended to, from our perspective, align those goals with the work under Vermont conservation design. One fairly modest tweak, and the next line that I believe it says conservation targets. When we speak of Vermont conservation design, we refer to conservation elements. Moving on to the next page. What have I done here? Oh dear, on this version, it's not showing up in blue. All of these edits at the top of the page are recommendations from VHCB. And this area under B2 is really the next place where the agency is recommending an additional change. And again, it's inventorying lands that are permanently conserved and fall into those conservation categories, and removing the sort of extension of to the extent practicable. We think we can do that work. The following sets of changes, again, were ones recommended by VHCB. We are recommending, however, the removal of this number 6, or replacement of this number 6, again, with a slightly modified reference to Vermont conservation design and the ecological functions of the landscape. And I'm happy to answer questions as we go along here.
And maybe just pause for a second, because I know I need to think a little before.
Sure. No, I know. I appreciate your squeezing me in, and that this is there are some of the changes we're proposing that may be an area that differs from the vision of the committee. I believe the particular change shown on the page here is one that is consistent with the vision of the committee and really seeks to sort of reference Vermont conservation design the way we reference and use it.
And I guess I'm wondering what that means to you, an assessment of each element in Vermont conservation design.
So we can, if we back up at that list at the beginning, the sustains biodiversity, maintains landscape connectivity, promotes climate resilience, supports working farms and forests, and provides opportunities for recreation and appreciation of the natural world. Those are the elements.
Of Vermont conservation design.
Of an ecologically functional landscape.
But I'm not sure what it means for the agency to do an assessment of each element in Vermont conservation design when it is the agency's document. I don't know what you mean by that.
That we're looking at the conservation tools and strategies and their ability to achieve each of those elements of Vermont conservation design. So it's trying to create that match or a crosswalk between different tools, whether it's forest legacy or farm reserve program or some of our clean water initiatives with wetland conservation and restoration, and how they line up with these different elements of an ecologically functional landscape.
Representative Sibilia.
And the conservation tools, I'm thinking about the chart that we had from Eric Sorensen this morning, are
Not sure what chart he shared.
it's a great chart.
It was
Secretary Moore.
his kind of first draft of how the sort of the inventory might begin.
Okay,
That was the matrix of Vermont conservation design elements and conservation strategies.
And so the tools referenced here are use value appraisal, conservation easements, rules and regulations, private land stewardship.
Exactly.
Are there any others? Those are the tools. And so,
I would have to think about that a little bit more than maybe I'm prepared to at the moment, but those are certainly at least a subset of the tools.
Okay.
Don't know. I couldn't rattle them off the top of my head and would want to go back and talk with John at Austin and Becca Washburn in particular to make sure we've captured the full extent.
So you've left an inventory and assessment of how water is protected in the state. And you may have heard us talking about this and understanding that water is already belongs to the people of the state of Vermont. And so what's your thought on that, on number 7?
Yeah, so water is held as a public trust. I don't see that it's a lot of work, frankly, either way. I think if it's helpful to readers who aren't Agency of Natural Resources staff to have that sort of incorporated as part of a larger planning document and acknowledgement of what it means for waters to be held as a public trust, and have this serve as a more comprehensive reference. I think that is a reasonable request. I don't see that there would be that's a lot of work for us to undertake simply because all waters of the state do currently have that status.
Okay, thank you.
Do you like me to continue? All right. So just moving through, again, trying to broaden the definition of conservation a bit. So it is not permanent non-conservation, but conservation, permanent non-conversion, but rather conservation used more broadly. The next set of changes should be in blue, theoretically recommended by VHCB. In fact, but this addition here of number 10 is one that came from the agency, and perhaps Representative Smith, this gets at your question, not just about the planning piece, but to come back with a reflection of the cost of implementation, stewardship needs, knowing that there are real costs associated with owning land, as well as the staffing capacity that we would require under these different planning scenarios.
So this is just sort of a rewording of what we had in 9 with the addition of cost.
Correct. And yes.
But yeah, okay. Understand.
It's a little different from 9.
Yeah.
I would maybe appreciate if we move forward with this, that we would say costs and benefits.
Yes. This is, yeah, we will be getting into more markup later. Yeah. Keep track of that for when we get into markup.
I believe
Representative
Just
Drongard.
just to be clear, Secretary, in 10, talk about stewardship needs and staffing capacity. You would be talking also about NGOs that are doing the same work. It's with some of them would be state, some of them would be NGOs. Okay.
correct. Essentially, the requirements to maintain that conserved land base.
Okay.
And then I think it was just one more, and this is mostly just wordsmithing, is our proposal was to amend what VHCB had already said, moving the report to being updated every 5 years as opposed to annually, and then just noting that we would be submitting it to the relevant committees following each update.
Are there questions for the secretary? Thoughts? Not a huge deal. I'll just go. I have, you have suggested removing the evaluation of the impact of generational land transfers, or VHCB did, but you agreed. So, and then with Mr. Martin, just prior to your joining us, we came up with how the state can direct resources at the time of intergenerational transfer, which is presumably already happening. So just curious what your thoughts are on that.
I mean, it's certainly when an intergenerational transfer is proposed, it is often a time when landowners contact us and are interested to understand what tools we may have to help the next generation afford to take on that land. I think the challenge from our end is how to, absent someone reaching out to us, the idea that we would know when a private land transaction would take place is probably not practical or realistic. And so our ability to have full sight into that particular moment in time is extremely limited.
Yeah.
Certainly, we are often working with aging landowners who cherish a particular piece of property and would like to see sort of conservation as part of that property's continued future. But that is generally relies on outreach from those landowners, as opposed to our evaluation is focused on the ecological functions of the land and identifying the parcels we're most interested in proactively and reaching out for, if that makes sense.
How much proactive outreach are you engaged in?
I would say it depends. Certainly there are places where there are inholdings within existing conserved tracts that the agency holds or immediately adjacent to areas that are conserved, where we are probably in much more frequent communication with those property owners about their interests and future plans. Because there's such a direct implication on the stewardship of areas that we are already responsible for. In addition to that, there are sort of places we know to be critical locations on the landscape from a connectivity perspective, or by particular biodiversity aspects and attributes. They may contain a sensitive habitat or a habitat for a rare, threatened, or endangered species that, again, we're sort of keeping, let's say, closer tabs on. But beyond that, I wouldn't say that there's an inordinate amount of proactive research on our part. There are also conservation opportunities often identified by different partner organizations that are brought to the agency for discussion and consideration to whether we might be the ultimate owner of those parcels, or just, sort of for shared knowledge as a group of organizations working in the conservation space.
Representative Morris.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Would we have any, I says talking about the intergenerational land transfers, it says the evaluation of the impact, which the secretary said that we wouldn't necessarily know all the private intergenerational land transfers. But with this plan is set up and developed, would this committee want to understand that if it's having any effect on increasing the trends, the land transfer trends? In other words, are more people contacting us, or it's the same? Without getting into the impact of that, is this plan having an effect on intergenerational land transfers or trends? It's just a trending. Comment on that?
I would want to talk to staff a little bit. I'm not sure, sort of what rises to the level of kind of exactly how we would track that there's a lot of informal contact and communication. It runs the gamut from, we have fairly intentional landowner stewardship and outreach efforts, helping folks understand different changes in management they might consider from a wildlife perspective or from a forest health perspective to their parcel. We have lots of conversations in regular order with anyone involved in the use value appraisal program when we're reviewing their forest management plans and the implementation thereof on the ground. And so it's not, those conversations aren't necessarily about intergenerational transfer, but it may be part of what comes up as staff are visiting the site. and can be a little bit hard to tease apart. So I would need to think a little bit more and talk to the team about if it's possible to create that sort of tracking mechanism.
My interest would be is we create a plan. It's one of the measurement tools. Are we seeing more people contacted in the state ANR for the possibility or not?
And I think that the challenge in there is also that we are often contacted by landowners whose land we don't have necessarily an interest in conserving, or it's not a priority for us to conserve. I would say we're focused on quality as much as quantity. And so oftentimes there are parcels that may be very meaningful to the landowner, but not a good fit for the Agency of Natural Resources in terms of our stewardship capacity and resource goals.
I'm not advocating one way or the other. I just was wondering if we would have interest as a one component of the measurement. I can accept your answer.
Thank you.
Representative Bongard.
So one thought around this discussion is in a way, are we really flirting with the notion of like proactive education in anticipation of intergenerational transfer? It wouldn't necessarily end up being, if it were part of the plan, it could end up being the land trust having this, as much to do with it as you do, but some plan for getting at that rather than find out after the fact that missed an opportunity. So I just wonder if we should try to develop as part of the plan a way to do that, some kind of proactive education so that thoughts about that?
Sure. So I know that for large landowners, that is a conversation that the land trust is often having with them right now. I would say, in terms of our work at ANR, one of my favorite moments in this job was having gone out with one of the staff in our forestry division, Keith Thompson, who I think you've heard from. And his vision for the work of the county foresters is trying to help every landowner fall in love with their property, right? And just how much that means, it extends the reach of our stewardship so much further than we're capable of. And hopefully extends to, as that property owner is thinking about intergenerational transfer and what comes next, that would be a consideration because they would have this love and appreciation of the piece of land that they're fortunate enough to live on. And I really see that as kind of the core of the agency's work. We have these brilliant scientists who can talk to people about all of the different aspects of the land that they inhabit, and hopefully engender that stewardship and land ethic.
So just another thing that I think I'm reading into this is that when we're talking about what we're calling 30 by 30, and we're talking about it as being permanently conserved, you're talking about getting to the 30 by 30 or 50 by 50 through some of that, but also some other that may not be permanent conservation.
Correct.
They may be more of, it's like we all understand and agree that we have the permanent conservation, and then all the things below it are very important. Current use, permitting, but they're all on one level ephemeral. They can come and go. In fact, we're losing forests, as we know. So that's kind of the key difference between what the bill says at this point and what you're advocating on. And by the way, I think you're being totally constructive here, and I view it that way. And I want to just make sure that we're getting the differences in approach here.
Right.
You're including some of those more ephemeral pieces of conservation, which play a huge role and preserve the option, but you are talking about using those as part of what we would consider achieving our goal of 30 by 30.
Correct. And I think what it comes back to is the agency's priority through our land acquisition plan is the ecologically functional landscape. And so more ephemeral conservation tool that is, at least provides temporary protection for a more important resource, we would rank higher than permanent conservation of a less priority resource. And the wording here is intended to reflect, a shared view that permanent conservation is an incredibly important tool in our toolbox, but gives us the flexibility to continue to think about what we need for an ecologically prioritize overall maintaining an ecologically functional landscape.
All right, further questions, members? Thanks for joining us.
You're welcome. I appreciate the opportunity.
Thanks for your markup.
Yes, and I will see, I don't know, did you receive the blue and red version and I just opened the wrong one? Okay, so thank you. I apologize for pulling up the wrong one, and
The blue and red is a collaboration between,
blue and red is, yeah, A&R and red. I just tried to make it so that you'd have all the edits received from us in VHCB in one place. So blue is VHCB and red is A&R. Unfortunately, the document I shared, everything was red, so it didn't.
Yeah, we have it now.
Okay,
Coming back here 5 minutes after the floor, folks,
for a vote.
for a vote. All right, with that, we will adjourn the floor.